Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game DC deck building game Rebirth. This was sent to me by Cryptozoic and is designed by... who are you designed by? Matt Hyra and Nathaniel Yamaguchi. Now, this is yet another game in the Cerberus engine line. So that's like the DC deck building game, which was in episode 15 of this series. What else we got? We got the Rick and Morty game from episode 53, and Attack on Titan deck building game from episode 63. So I'm not going to go through how to play the basic rules of the Cerberus engine, you know, using power to buy cards and stuff. Watch episode 15 for that, and then but I'm going to be discussing the differences with this new set, because there are quite a few differences here. In DC deck building game Rebirth, you and your friends work together, taking on the roles of Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, or other members of the Justice League across a series of linked scenarios. During each scenario, you'll need to adapt to new and challenging circumstances and build up a strong deck with the goal of defeating the DC supervillains before time runs out. Move your characters around the city to find the cards you want for your deck and to stop the villains' dastardly plans. Now, I'm not going to go through all the scenario cards because that would be spoiling the game. I'm just going to go over the initial scenario that they present to you in the game. Let me show you how to play. Alright, so here's the initial setup for scenario 1. We have different locations here with different sides. Some of them have sides, B sides, where they have item stacks. Other sides have just like effects. You also have these lineup slot spaces. You got a secret card, you got a threat track, and then each player will get a deck consisting of 6 punches, which are just +1 power. That's the currency in the game. Run is move 2. If you've played the Attack on Titan game, you might be familiar with that concept. I'll explain it in a second. And Helping Hand, which lets you do assist, range 0, and a +1 power. We'll go over that later. Each player gets their own character with their own power and their own marker to move around on the board. Like, for example, Superman here, once during each of your turns, +1 power for each villain in your space. But yeah, this is the initial setup, and let's go through how to play. This is the threat track. It's an indicator of the amount of peril the city is in, and as more and more supervillains show up, things get increasingly worse. So in the main deck here, we initially divided this into 5 piles, and then shuffled 2 supervillains into 2 through 5 piles. And so they're randomly dispersed in this stack, and they're going to show up, these nasty supervillains. Now, a lot of levels on the threat track have a red text. That is an ongoing effect that is always applicable, even if it moves up. So starting off, each time a supervillain enters the lineup, increase the threat level by 1, and it makes its attack against each player. But as it goes up, worse stuff will happen. Like during step 4 of the turn sequence, if there are no supervillains, add an additional card. And if we get up to here, villains cost 1 more to defeat. It's pretty nasty. And if we get all the way up here, your team has 3 rounds to defeat a 5th supervillain or lose the game. There can also be one-time one-shot effects, like destroy the highest cost non-villain card in each lineup slot, which can be pretty nasty too. So yeah, in every scenario, they'll give you a pack. You don't flip over the cards. For example, they look like these, and they're secret. But they'll tell you all the instructions for how to set them up. And again, this is just the first scenario. I won't spoil anything beyond this one. So scenario 1, Proving Grounds. The gang's all together and needs to learn to function as a team. The Justice League's greatest foes have come to town to see if you are truly the world's greatest heroes. Can you defeat 5 supervillains before time runs out? And so you just got to beat 5 of them before the timer runs out. So to start off, each player takes their deck and shuffles it, and then you're going to draw 5 cards. And then as a team, you get to choose who goes first, and then you go clockwise from that player. On your very first turn, you don't start on the board, so you can choose any of the 10 spaces on the circle you want. Let's say Superman decides to start here. Now, you can only buy cards that your character is on. So, right now, Superman has 3 power and 4 movement. So, he could decide to buy this card, because it's lowest lane and it's 3. Or he could move over to here and buy a flight. Or could he reach anywhere else? He could. He could go 1, 2, 3, 4 and go to that Batmobile if he really wanted that card instead. But let's say he decides to stay here and buy the lowest lane. He would add it to his discard pile like you do in any of the other deck building games. And then if he wanted, he could then move. He could even move, buy, and then continue to move. But let's say he did this and then he's going to move, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, just to be ready for upcoming villains or something. As you can see, some locations have basic cards. There's a stack of 5, like the Bat Cycle. You can choose to move 2 or +2 power. You can only buy 1 of each basic card during your turn. You can't buy like 3 bat cycles. But you could buy, let's say, 1 bat cycle and 1 flight if you had enough movement. Like here, flight, it's assist, range 3, plus 1 power. I'll go over assisting in a second, and then place your character in any space, which is pretty useful. Now, villains are nasty. Right now we have 1. We've got a Black Manta here in the city. But whenever a supervillain enters the lineup, you move this up on the threat track, which is the timer of the game. And each villain has an attack. When a supervillain enters the lineup, they have an attack that they use against each player. Like, for example, General Zod here, he'll attack everyone and everyone gains a weakness, which, as you know, are these shitty zero cards that do nothing. Now, each villain has a pentagonal icon that corresponds with a location tile on the board. So Black Manta has a 5. He wants to go up to this location here. Now, villains are very active at the beginning of each player's turn. Villains that are at their destination or sharing a space with the active player's character attack only the active player, whoever started their turn. So if it's Wonder Woman's turn and he was on the same space, he would attack. If there are multiple villains, you can resolve them in the order of your choosing. And then, after resolving all attacks, villains not sharing a space with a character would move 1 space towards their destination. So let's say if Black Manta wasn't on Wonder Woman's space, he would then move up 1 because he's going up to number 5. He always takes the shortest path, whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise. Now, moving into a space does not trigger an attack. It's if a villain starts their turn on the same space as a character, they will attack. If you manage to defeat a villain using power to pay for the cost, in this case 7, you get the reward on the villain. This is draw 2 cards. So if Wonder Woman had 7 power, bam. Black Manta's gone, she draws 2 cards. Now, what's critical is that if a villain attacks you on the same space, that means they don't get to move. So it may be crucial if you want to protect a specific location. Now, in Rebirth, only villains have attacks. But if you have a defense card, you may choose to play it to defend. Like, let's say you have Vibration. As a defense, you can discard this to avoid each attack this turn, and for each attack you avoid, you get +1 power. Assisting is a new keyword in this set, and it's definitely a very crucial part of the co-op in this game. So every character has a helping hand card in their starting deck, and assist means you can play this card during another player's turn, and if you do, that player gains all benefits from the game text. So let's say if someone really needs +1 power and or they need to move their character 1 space. You can choose to play this card on their turn, and it's as if they played the card. However, you don't get to draw a card to replace this, so you are going to lose 1 card on your turn when it's your turn. But it may be very useful if, let's say, to beat Black Manta, Wonder Woman needed 1 more power because she only had 6. You could use this to do it. And multiple players can do that too, which can be really useful. But one thing that's crucial about all assist cards and any card with a range keyword is that you have to be within that range if you want to assist them. So to use this range 0 card, let's say Batman had this card. Batman would have to be on the same space because range 0 means on the same space. A card like Zodiac Crystals, you can be within range 2. Which is up to 2 spaces away, and then they would let them draw a card and pay 2 less to defeat supervillains, which is pretty useful. Now, looking at some of these location tiles, some of them have effects on them. You can only use these effects once per turn, like the Daily Planet here. If you discard a card, you can reveal the top card of your deck, and you may discard it, which can be useful for going through your deck. Arkham Asylum up here is pay 2 power and move target villain 1 space towards this space, which again, can be very useful because these guys are trying to destroy locations. And like I said before, any location with a stack of basic items, you can only buy 1 card of these per turn. Like the Bat Signal here, +1 power, and put a hero from your discard pile on top of your deck. If there's a supervillain in the lineup, put it into your hand instead. Now, each location has 5 hit points, and each time a supervillain makes an attack, while at their destination and it's not avoided, you put a damage token on the location. Let's say Deathstroke is there, because he's going to go for location 4. He would do 1 damage if it was unprotected, which is not great. As soon as the location has 5 damage tokens on it, you remove them and place a destroyed token on that space. Any basic cards on the location will be removed immediately, and then the ability of that location cannot be used. Damage on locations is permanent from scenario to scenario. You keep track of that in the campaign log, and so you want to avoid as much damage as possible. And then, like in past DC deck building games, there's cards that let you destroy cards, like Simon Baz, +1 power, reveal the top card of your deck, draw it, or destroy. Destroying it obviously means you remove it from the game. Ongoing cards like Wonder Woman Shield, they stay in front of you. You can discard them from play, or discard a card with cost 1 or greater from your hand to avoid an attack. So now that you know the behavior of cards and villains, let's go through how a turn actually works. On turn sequence, on step 1, you do any start of your turn effects. Then, any villains that are at their destination or sharing a space with the active character would attack. Only the active player if they're present there. So like I said, if Black Manta started on this space with Wonder Woman, he would then attack her and she would suffer the penalty unless she defended. Otherwise, if she wasn't on the same space as her, all villains move towards their destination. Let's say Deathstroke was here, he would start moving to location 4. Then what you do is you take the top card of the main deck and add it to the lineup slot with the fewest cards, including villains. Right now, there's no card in this spot, so we would reveal a Bat Plane. Assist range 2, +3 power, place your character on any space. And that would go there. If there were a tie, the lower slot number wins the tie. So up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you would play cards from your hand, total up your move and power, move around, buy cards, and or fight villains. On the very first turn of the game, you don't do any of the villain stuff, but once after that, they would all start moving and attacking. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. There are side missions. I won't go over those, but they'll be revealed to you. There are also signature cards, which the campaign will eventually let you add to your decks. There's a solo mode and a competitive mode. I'm not going to go through all the details of that. That's if you really are interested in those, but you be aware that the game does include them. Otherwise, yeah, I guess I can just go through a handful of cards and also some of the powers that the characters have. So for example, here's a Wonder Woman card. It's an assist range 1, +2 power. You may put an assist card from your discard pile on top of your deck. We got constructs. It's just target player draws 2 cards. It's a superpower card. Grappling hook, draw a card. You may move target villain within range 2 to your space. Let's go through some of the superhero powers like Superman. Once during each of your turns, +1 power for each villain in your space. So he's all about those villains. Wonder Woman. The second time you play an assist card during each player's turn, target player draws a card, so she's really good support. Batman. Each time you avoid an attack or defeat a villain, target player reveals the top card of their deck and may destroy it. So he's about culling your decks. Aquaman. Each time you play a superpower during your turn, target player may put a card with cost 4 or less from their discard pile on the bottom of their deck. So he's all about those superpower cards. Cyborg, if you play 2 or more different equipment during your turn, move 1 and +2 power. So he might be about collecting those equipment. Jessica Cruz, during each of your turns, if you play 3 or more cards with the same card type, you may move target villains 1 space, which can be good so that they avoid hitting or damaging locations or attacking fellow heroes. The Flash, at the start of each of your turns, you get move 2, which makes sense because he's all about movement. And if you pay 5 movement, a target player can draw a card. And then Simon Baz, during each of your turns, if you play 3 or more different card types, so he's about collecting different ones, draw a card or move target character 1 space. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You're building up your deck by buying cards from the lineup slots, and you're trying to defeat the villains and get the rewards and avoid preventing them from appearing. And if you can beat 5 of them, you win the first scenario. So to me, this game feels like the Attack on Titan deck building game, but kind of fully realized. It's challenging, but it's pretty satisfying to play. This may be kind of like the most thematic version of the DC deck building game I've played, just because you really do feel like heroes zooming around this city and trying to stop villains from attacking. The original DC deck building game, which I enjoy, doesn't feel like a superhero game. It really feels like you're just collecting cards and just trying to beat each other. This has elements that kind of remind me more of like a co-op deck building game like Marvel Legendary, which is my favorite game, actually. But what I like about this game is that moving around the board really feels important and strategic. While I enjoyed recruiting the villain cards in the original game, defeating them and receiving a reward for defeating them feels more thematic. It makes more sense instead of, oh, I get Joker into my deck. No, if I beat Joker, I get a reward. That makes more sense. And there's always a feeling of tension as they're moving around the board towards their destination. I enjoy the mechanics of like moving them away from locations or from allies so they don't attack. Or maybe sacrificing yourself so that they'll attack you instead of moving towards the location. Again, it really adds to the hero theme Assist cards are the best part of the game. Throwing down cards so you can help your ally during their turns is really fun, actually, because it's like, okay, you need 2 more power. I got you. I'm on the same space as you with a range 0. I can add a card. Can you add a card? Oh, I can add a card too. Because this game is pretty tough, and being able to defeat a villain with a super high cost by throwing down cards together as a team always makes you kind of cheer, because you're like, yeah, we did it together. It really feels like you are a team. My only minor issues with the game is, compared to the original system, this one can feel a little too fiddly for me. Like how the villains attack and move, and how the locations of health points and where to put cards in the lineup each turn. It can be a little slightly more complicated than they need to be. It's not super complicated, but it's a little annoying. Also, another problem I had with the Attack on Titan game that is still present in this game is that sometimes you just don't draw move cards, especially in the beginning of the game where you have no other cards except like 6 punches, 3 runs, and a helping hand. Sometimes you just are stuck and you cannot get to a space where you can buy a card. Helping hand cards can help a little bit, but the first part of the game, honestly, can feel very unforgiving, especially if you can't get your momentum going, which in a deck building game is very important. This is still a problem, I think, with these games. I think the heroes should have at least a minimum amount of movement they can do without a card. Maybe even if at least 1 space or something like that. Because without it, sometimes you are just fucked. You do not have enough movement to do anything, and you can't buy that card because it's on the other side of the city. I feel like there needs to be something to mitigate that. A little bit of base movement, because that can help mitigate the randomness of deck building. Overall, though, I think the game is successful. If you like the original game and or like DC, but you want something kind of more cooperative, I recommend the game. I know there have been cooperative like variants and stuff in the DC deck building game, but I think this one has a unique spin. It implements the movement mechanics really interestingly, and it feels more like a superhero game than the original. And again, the feeling of assisting each other to take down villains really feels good. Like Marvel Legendary has a similar system. I forget what it's called. It's Coordinate, I think. Coordinate, where you can play cards on another player's turn. This is the best part of the DC deck building game Rebirth, is that sort of assist system. So if that sounds fun to you, the idea of working together to beat these powerful villains while also zooming around a city, I would recommend it. It is good, especially if you enjoyed the original. I think it's just a no-brainer to buy this as the next step up.